Hi, I'm Andy Dean and I am creating a natural garden. Well, I'm making up what I am calling a natural garden to garden as close to nature as possible, i.e. if there were a line drawn between the wilderness, if we had any left in this country, which we'll probably call the countryside, and gardens and their uses for people, for beauty, for aesthetics, for growing, etc., etc. That line I would like to be as thin as possible. I was thinking the other day, and this gets pretty hard when it gets into food production, but I haven't got food production going at the moment, though I will have. I've had a bit, actually. But we'll talk about that in more detail later. I'm going to extend that this year. But let's look at a garden which is more along the line of sort of function, aesthetics, as opposed to production. And I would like to invite, or for the garden to welcome, any visitors from the countryside or the wild. So, you know, we have mice and we have moles, and what else do we have in here that some people don't want? Quite often squirrels. Equally, if a deer could get in here or wanted to come in here, then they would be welcome too, because the plants that are growing in this garden are British wild plants, many of them native, some of them not native, but still that grow in the wild in Britain, therefore adapted to our climate and environment, and are generally very resilient in that. So an extension from that, it being very close to nature, it then supports British ecology. Many of the plants we bring into gardens don't really support that ecology. They do a lot of other things for us. They're very beautiful, they smell great, they look nice, they give us pleasure, I guess, in that respect, but actually don't often do an awful lot for nature. So I'm really using a palette of British wild plants mainly, and those plants do well, everyone knows about pollinators, so we talk about pollinators a lot. It's in sort of gardening media, it's out there in the zeitgeist. Everyone knows about pollinators, so that's really, I mean, not in all cases, but in many cases, pollinators feed adult flying insects. Well, certainly in the ones that metamorphosize. So many insects, butterflies, moths, beetles, flies, bees as well, metamorphosize, so they have an egg, larval, pupae, and adult stage. Now, the data out there is, well, it's pretty inaccessible. So I'm concentrating mainly on, certainly the recording of what I'm doing, on moths and butterflies, and larger moths at that. Now I'm specifically looking at these because, apart from being pollinators, plants are a food source to herbivorous insects that, in the earlier stages of their life cycle, in the larval stage, those herbivorous larvae tend to eat a very small selection of plants. They've evolved to, so there's an exchange, a battle, if you like, between plants and insects, and the plants are developing compounds which are hard to digest, or perhaps they've got physical barriers, or waxy coatings, that sort of thing, that insects can't penetrate. So what tends to happen is that the larval insects end up with just very few plants to be able to eat, and a larvae really is just an eating machine. It has no sexual organs. It's just effectively a tube which is eating as much as possible to get itself through, get the energy together to be able to survive a pupae and stage and metamorphose into an adult, which will then obviously go on to mate and reproduce. So those larvae are the ones that, in my opinion, are missing out right now. They are under supported. A lot of the plants that we bring into the garden, newer introductions, something called neophytes, I'll talk about that in another time, and because they haven't evolved with the insects, British native insects, there's no exchange between them, there's no compatibility between them. So we really need to grow British wild plants so that we have that compatibility in the garden between insect larvae and the plants that they rely on. Now those are called larval food plants, and I will talk about larval food plants a lot. This is really mainly what I do. It's really mainly what I support. I'm not really that fussed about pollinators, only because when you've got a larval food plant, the chances are that it's almost certainly going to go into flower and support those pollinators anyway. So it's just pollination is a byproduct of the plant, which is supporting the whole insect. So it's supporting the larvae, and then it's supporting the adult insect. And so the way I manage that really is I am trying to do as lower intervention garden as possible. Now, if you're a garden designer, or if I was helping a garden designer, we wouldn't be able to do as lower intervention as this. We would have to look at a plant palette perhaps, and then we would select out plants that were maybe weaker, had a weaker offer to our ecology, to our insects, and then we could put plants, substitute those with plants that work better. But in this garden, I'm essentially really just curating the garden. I'm as things come up, I'm sort of nurturing the plants that I want, and I'm sort of thinning out or editing out plants that really not that I don't want, but that, because some of them are incredibly good, most of them incredibly good actually, especially things like nettles. But this is where we get into the problems of the big arguments about native plants, and or walking away from the garden, rewilding a garden, walking away from a garden. Rewilding a garden, you can't just walk away from a garden. It needs management, and this is why I'm called this natural gardening, because it is gardening. It's not just walking away from it, because you would just end up through succession, you would just get brambles and all sorts of other scrubland, and then into a forest, into a woodland, and over time, it would just be impenetrable. It wouldn't be a shared space, and the garden is a shared space between humans and anything else. So so I am editing the garden a bit. I'm thinning those things out, giving space for more British wild plants, and my first call is to go and seed collect in the wild, and then I tend to just scatter that seed, let it sort of come up where it wants to. Where was I hearing the other day? Oh, I happened to be at a talk called Wilding the City by Future Spaces Studio in Bath, and they were talking about words being used like what was it? I use phrases like the plant deciding where it wants to grow. Obviously, a plant got decide. There's no cognition, but it's less prescriptive for me to seed, and for that seed to find the exact conditions it wants to grow in and be at home, if you like, in the garden where it grows. It will be stronger for it. It'll be the right place. The ones that aren't in the right place will be outcompeted or will struggle, and that's where we get an insect or a pathogen attack when a plant isn't happy, which is why we've got into this terrible situation of putting plants that have been grown somewhere else into a garden. They don't work well. They get attacked by things because they're weak and they're struggling, and then we decide, well, let's spray them with things that will help the plant, but will actually do an awful lot of damage to anything else. So I digress slightly, but essentially I'm collecting seed from the wild and scattering it. In a few places I have been a little bit more prescriptive, because even for me, who's incredibly invested in this project, it can take an incredible amount of time to for the garden to develop. We've been here 3.5 years. We moved in September of 21. It's now March of 25. I think the garden is absolutely stunning and beautiful, but to most eyes it would probably look like a sort of waste space. I guess it sort of in some ways looks like a field, which is in some ways what I'm going for. But as time goes on, it will look like what you might see in the countryside, what you might see in a field, but it will it will be enhanced. It will have sort of a amplified version of that, if you like. Probably more species than you would be likely see in a sort of normal sort of field scenario. So I have put a few plants in from sort of weeds from neighbours' gardens, and then I may well go on to this year develop a plan for the garden where I will put in plants that support our butterflies that are most in decline. I will put in plants that are rare in our area, and I will put in the best performing larval food plants. That's Stevie, my dog, in the background. He's just seen a horse. I better go and stop her scaring the horse. Okay, so that's about the size of it. Enough of me rabbiting on for the minute. Let me show you what the garden looks like at the moment. It's, like I say, it's about the 10th of March, something like that. We're in Wiltshire, South Wiltshire. It's a nice sunny day actually, and we just had a really sunny but cold week. So now's a good time to start. Things are sort of just starting to come out, and hopefully I can document this over the year. We can see what's happening, what it looks like, share the journey a little bit.